Here are my initial takeaways about how Democrats lost the presidency in election 2024. I know that this has been a really tough week for a lot of people, and a lot of Americans are reeling from the re-election of Donald Trump as President of the United States. If that includes you, I hope that you take the time and the space to process what you are feeling and be able to move forward once you've done that. Because the reality is that we are going to need every single one of us in the fight ahead. That includes the next 4 years and beyond that. I'm making this video in the spirit of honest self-reflection and learning from that. We need to honestly talk about the mistakes that were made in this election and learn from this moment so that it is never repeated again. This is my contribution towards that. First off, I do want to say that I think Vice President Kamala Harris had the momentum and the energy required to win this election. And she had that energy specifically at the end of July and in the initial weeks of August when she first became the presumptive Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And a lot of that energy for her was tied to her identity, being a Black, South Asian woman of Jamaican and Indian ancestry, being a child of immigrants, being an HBCU grad, being a fully self-made woman. And then there was another infusion of energy when Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota was chosen to be her vice president. There was so much promise in those initial several weeks of Harris becoming the presumptive Democratic nominee and her making her VP pick. I truly believe that she could have won the 2024 election had she done more to differentiate herself from Joe Biden as president. Had she pivoted away from the policies that made Joe Biden unpopular as president, she would have won. But the reality is that Harris's campaign did not do that. From my perspective, they relied on her identity and gender alone to differentiate her from Biden. The policies of her campaign were largely the same in continuation of the Biden-Harris policies. And this election, the 2024 election, was a change election that required a change candidate, not a continuation of the same policies or the same administration. From my perspective, nationally, the Democrats lost the presidency for a myriad of reasons, and here are my top 3 reasons. Number 1 is the financial situation that working class Americans live in day to day. So overall, the economy might be in a good place when evaluated from holistic metrics or at a macro level, or even evaluated for people who are college educated and work as professional workers. But you have to understand that the average working class worker in America, that is not their experience. And if people don't feel financially secure in their day-to-day life, then that means that the economy is not working for them. And that is the economy to them. We are currently at a point in time where consumer credit card debt is at an all-time high in America. And that's not just because people are putting vacations on credit cards or buying frivolous things. This credit card debt is a result of people not being able to survive on whatever income they are earning. So a lot of working class Americans are putting basic needs, things that they need to survive, like groceries, like rent, like utility bills on credit cards, and they're not able to make those credit card payments. So the credit card bills just accumulate. The number 2 reason is the Biden and Harris administration's absolute moral failure on the genocide in Gaza. In addition to the genocide in Gaza and the US government's complicity in it, the American government funding the genocide and arming the genocide and continuing to do so is deeply unpopular within the Democratic base and across the American electorate. The continuation of these policies, despite widespread protests throughout the United States, including at college campuses, turned off key segments of the Democratic base, and that included the youth vote, the Arab vote, and the Muslim vote. This failure particularly echoes back to the 1968 election. In the 1968 election, Herbert Humphrey was running against Richard Nixon, and Humphrey was the vice president of President Lyndon Baines Johnson. The parallels with 1968 start with the president at the time pulling out of a re-election race to be president again. LBJ announced that he would not run to be president again and he would complete his term and somebody else would become the Democratic nominee. Just like in July, Joe Biden pulled out of this presidential race. Another parallel is that in both cases, the Democratic vice president at the time, in 1968 it was Herbert Humphrey, and in 2024 it was Kamala Harris. They became the presumptive Democratic nominee, eventual Democratic nominee that replaced their president on the ticket. And in the 1968 election, you have to remember the Vietnam War was the context at the time, and all of the college protests, the unrest that was going on at America at that time. He did end up breaking away from LBJ on the policy towards Vietnam, which was highly unpopular here domestically in the US, but he broke away too late. I think it was with about a month left in the election. And the result was that Humphrey ended up losing that election by less than 1 single percentage point to Richard Nixon. As of today, Kamala Harris is down about 1.5% from Donald Trump. And the reality in the 2024 election is that Kamala Harris never broke from Biden's policy on Gaza. Number 3 is the baseline racism and misogyny within the American electorate. The original sins of America are the genocide against the Native Americans and hundreds of years of chattel slavery. I've seen numerous videos and posts that are attributing this loss solely to racism, solely to sexism, or both of the factors combined. The Democrats losing the presidency is not solely because of racism and sexism. Yes, they are contributing factors. In addition to making unavoidable mistakes from the 1968 election, mistakes from the 2016 election were also repeated. The Harris Walz campaign tacked right on policy to attract centrist and moderate Republican voters. The initial data is showing that that effort did not translate into votes earned. And the tacking right included the Harris Walz rhetoric on immigration, fracking, and catering to corporate leaders and interests. It included the promise that Harris made of adding a Republican to her cabinet, and celebrating endorsements by figures that are reviled by the Democratic base, like Dick and Liz Cheney. Not only did this shift right not earn moderate Republican votes, it depressed turnout amongst key segments of the Democratic base. And key segments of the Democratic base ended up voting for Donald Trump. So why did this happen? How did the strategy for the presidency go so off of the rails and fail? This entire situation represents an astounding failure of leadership of the Democratic Party. Period, full stop. That includes and is not limited to Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, the Obamas, and the Clintons, Hakeem Jeffries, and Chuck Schumer. It includes everyone who is serving in the establishment and leadership of the Democratic Party at this very moment. In terms of looking towards the future and the next 4 years under a Trump presidency, the reality is that Donald Trump and his party, the Republican Party, are going to have control over a lot of levers of the American government. They're going to have the presidency. We know that they're going to have control of the Senate. They may have control of the House. We'll know for sure on that in the next few weeks. And they have a majority on the Supreme Court of the United States and will get to appoint more judges there and appoint more judges just to the federal courts of the United States as well. We need to remember that we can't lose hope because Donald Trump is in power. He and his party have taken over all of these institutions. We have to remember that the power of the United States is in its people. We're really gonna need to lean into that people power and focus on organizing and solidarity. Our leaders are never going to save us. That was the case in the past. It's going to be the case going forward. Our leaders are not going to save us. We, as a collective, as the people, with people power, are going to save ourselves. Let me know if this video resonated with you and what you think about my takeaways and analysis. If there's any questions that you have or anything that you want analyzed or my perspective on, please leave that in the comments and I promise I'll try to make a video about it. And I create content like this all the time, so subscribe to my channel to know when I put new videos out. Thank you so much.